Right, so we're into the second week of 2024, so I'm continuing my going through sections around the garden at my home here outside Lusaka, Zambia, where I planted a tree every day, or for every day, in 2023. And now we're into section 2, which is right by section 1. So section 1 is just on that side of this little Dracaena, and there's a line of mango trees that you can't quite see all of except this first one here. And then we have got this general field here, which is bounded in the background by entirely invisible at the moment because of some very leafy acacias, some avocado trees which are much older than me, and then we've got a workshop over there and some more mango trees, and basically this little quadrant is more or less section 2. So we'll be going through that and trying not to miss any this time of the trees that I planted. So here, right on the boundary of section 1 and 2, we have a little soursop, which is Annona muricata. There has been a little bit of shifting of identities of some of the Annonas, because some things I've been sold as soursop over the years definitely have different leaves to this, and things I thought were cherimoyas are not. But yeah, anyway, this little guy has grown nicely. There was a jackfruit here originally, which suffered significantly before the rest did. You can see this very dense planting in here, which is quite good usually for jackfruit, but for this particular one didn't work out for some reason. Yeah, little Annona muricata is pretty happy. And over here we've got our little rain tree, which wasn't a planting. This is Phalaenoptera. It got buried entirely by mole rats at one point, but it's coming back up. It wasn't a planting, but I was going to plant something there, and then yeah, then I realized that was there, and that's a tree I wanted to encourage, so I marked it out. The Dracaena is gone thanks to the mole rats, but the aloe is still a good marker. And we go past our little compost heap, and we've got this plumeria, which was planted a couple of years ago, which is really just to keep the grass down here a little bit, add a little bit more shade to make it more hospitable for other things in the long run. Potentially that will come out. You don't want them high density, but they can be sociable with other trees if they're at a reasonably low density. But on the edge of the same thicket, I did plant a kiwi fruit in here, but because that is a vine, even though it died, the tree is still okay. So this is a Yucca gigantea, which you can see from this bend did sulk rather over the year, but it is perking back up. You can see it is pointing back upright again, but they tend to do this quite a lot. The Dracaenas do it even more dramatically sometimes, but it is alive and well even if the focal part of the planting isn't. And just here we originally planted a Livistona, which is the Chinese fan palm. This is more open than I really think is advisable for that, with the amount of watering I do and with the well-drained soils we have, because we're on sand. But it wasn't the sun that got this. This was mole rats got this. Usually they will move into things like that when they are stressed, but sometimes they will just destroy small things because small things are easy for them to digest. But this is the only Livistona I think that we have lost. And I've replaced it with a pencil tree some time ago, which you can see is growing quite nicely. So this is Euphorbia tyricale, which is a very old inedible plant to have been in cultivation. It's been in cultivation for something like 6,000 years, which when you can't eat it is considerable. It is quite medicinal though. And something that has been in cultivation for less time, but is significantly more edible, this is the sala nut. So this is a Pachira glabra. This is one I have planted a lot of, and they are almost all doing well. So yeah, this one is no exception. It's Dracaena. On the other hand, everything above ground is gone. I don't know if there's anything left below ground, but it doesn't look like it. And just here we had one of 3 Phoenix reclinata. This one failed to thrive. You can see I need to pick up some more mangoes because it's been a windy day, so it's plenty of dropping off. But we had a Phoenix reclinata. We've had a very bad year for Phoenix reclinata, so that got replaced from something which normally shares its environment, which is Kigelia africana, the sausage tree, which is a very nice medicinal tree. It doesn't have the edible fruit of the wild date palm, but it does have a fruit that can be pounded up to make a sort of topical medicine. It's very good for treating sores, burns, that sort of thing. And it's also got a lot of traditional uses beyond that. But this is coming up beautifully. You can see all these shoots coming out of the side of it, which seem to have come up since it went in, and it's, yeah, looking good. Now, in amongst this ginger bush here, which I planted a couple of years back as a sort of barrier between sections 1 and 2, we do have another planting which looked like it was doing poorly because it did die right back. This was a banana tree, is a banana tree. So you can argue over whether that is a tree, because we have a Dracaena studinary there, which is definitely a tree to make up for it. And this is coming up really nicely, having died right back down to the ground. It has pushed up another one, I think from the same spot, which is atypical, but the growth point usually is below ground for bananas, so not impossible. But yeah, it's coming up nicely. And this companion plant, which is a fence aloe, which sometimes I've been incapable of working out what makes them thrive. This one seems to be doing really well, so I'm pleased with that. We've got, I think, a cornflower of Annona here. This is one of the rather lovely, it is a perennial wildflower, but it tends to die right back to the root every year, but lovely flowers, if it's the one I think it is. We've also got ipe here, which I've been using as a word all year. So this is Handranthus. It's an American tree, South American tree, Central American, some of them. I think this is Chrysanthus, which should be South American, but it is quite invasive, but not particularly aggressive, because it has quite an open canopy and doesn't get dense, so it seems to get all right with everything, and does also, as you can see, get eaten by a lot of the insects that eat our native members of the same family, which is Bignoniaceae, so things like the sausage tree are in the same family. So yeah, so this is coming up all over this place, so you will see more of them. This one is another self-seeded. This is one of the Terminalia mollis, I think. Not sure, it's one of the larger leaf Terminalias. They tend to pop up quite a lot here. And here we have another replacement. This time it was a Yucca and a Strophanthus going in to replace this little guy, who is waiting for another home if he perks back up, but he doesn't look like he's going to. So this was a Euphorbia tyricale, but he got chomped through the base, and his base is really not re-rooting very readily. And so instead we planted this lovely little Yucca gigantea. Mostly kept the same companion plants, but we did add this little Strophanthus, which is a native flowering vine, which did die back, as you can see from this dead stick, but you can see it's perking back up from the base there, so hopefully that will fill out and cover this up quite nicely. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the next tree along has died, but I did check the other day, and no, in here, where it probably wants to be at the moment, because it is quite vulnerable to sunburn when it's young, we have an Areobotria japonica, which is the locot, which is a lovely subtropical fruit, really, from China, despite the name implying it's from Japan. It has been grown there for like 1,000 years though, so fair enough. But yeah, so this is coming along nicely. It did get quite burned, as you might guess from the size of the leaves. These usually have quite big leaves, but they are coming back up, and I might actually have to trim back some of this calico at some point, just to make it a little easier for it to come up without it getting too distorted. Next up we have an Asian tree that I'm going to call a macrut, although I don't think that is the best name for it, but the best name, because of historical reasons, someone with my ancestry should not say. It has been nibbled a bit here. You can see a lot of these young leaves have come off. There are woolly bears around at the moment, so I don't know if that is from them doing that or something else. Oh no, this is on a mature leaf, which is where I expect to find this. So this is the first stage of the caterpillar of the citrus swallowtail, which I did a little short about a while ago. So when they're very little, they look like this. Then they'll grow up and look a little bit more like a bird dropping. They'll grow up a bit more and be quite large and green. It would not be normal for them to have done this, but who have we got? Is that one? Oh, but we do have one inside there, so I don't know if just their feeding generally has caused a little bit of stress while this is establishing, because that is a lot of growth for it to put out at once. Usually these are a little bit slow to get started, or at least with the previous ones I've planted. But otherwise the tree is healthy. It doesn't seem overly stressed by the feeding. It's just dropped some of the new growth. It's held on to some of it too. You can see some of the more mature new growth is settling in nicely, so I'm okay with that. Our next tree is also kind of lost, not so much in its companion plants this time, but in the general sort of grassiness, because I haven't sized this bit yet this year, or if I have, I've only done it once. So this is Bauhinia variegata. So this is the Singapore Bauhinia, or orchid tree. It's a lovely, lovely, beautiful flower when it's mature, and this one has pretty much doubled in size since the rain hit. You can see just here how tall it was when the rains arrived. Basically, that was the last leaf it had left. No, this was the last leaf it had left, and all of that has come in since then, so there's not much below that. So yeah, doubled in size since the rain hit, so really pleased with that. And And just across the way here we have what I think is a bullock's heart. So this is Annona reticulata. So this is the smooth custard apple, which because they usually sold a smooth custard apple, there was a little bit of a sort of identity issue, because trying to work out having no physical access to all the varieties is difficult. And see, this one is actually trying to flower. Whether it will actually try and fruit yet, I do not know. This is more exposed than I'd usually plant this type. You can see there's sort of no shelter from the eastern side, so the morning sun is entirely open. There is, once you get to sort of 4 o'clock in the afternoon most of the year, and at this time of year, once you get to about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there's a mango tree to shelter it. But it is still relatively open, so it's quite dense ground cover around here, probably quite helpful. You can see it did get a little bit burned, and it's only new leaves here. All the old leaves got toasted off, but it is coming up all right, and it's again flowering. So whether it'll fruit or not, I will see. I doubt it can hold it though, because it's quite a big fruit. And next up, we have a tiny little Christmas tree who has also grown pretty well since it went in. So this is not a typical Christmas tree, which I think are usually spruce or fir. So this is a cypress. This is a Monterey cypress, so Cupressus macrocarpa, which I grew from seed from one of the hedges my grandmother had growing years and years ago. I have 2 grandmothers. The one who lived in Zambia had this hedge growing. So this is a tree from California, from basically 2 places around Monterey Bay in California, that is very popular as a hedge, and has also contributed to a whole bunch of other cypresses. Because it hybridizes, it's not entirely clear growing it from seed whether it is true species, so we'll see. But we will, yeah, it's coming up nicely, so hopefully we really will be able to see. And just in here, I think, yeah, this should be a rough lemon. So this is Citrus X Jambury, which is unlike the sort of typical lemon you will see in shops. This has no pomelo ancestry. It's just mandarin and a citron. It is coming along nicely. This is new growth since it went in, this light yellow stuff. Unlike the Citrus hystrix, it does come out light green rather than reddish usually, which is, the Citrus hystrix is much more what I expect of tropical plants. This is much more what I expect of subtropical ones. But it is coming up really nicely despite being quite crowded in here. People say citrus aren't sociable, but that has not been my experience, provided they settle in sociably. They don't always react well to things coming up beside them, but again, sometimes they actually do seem to appreciate it. But yeah, it's coming along nicely. And then going a little further into this is barely their tree. There was, well, I think it is also toast. Yeah, so this was another spot where I had planted a kiwi fruit, because they are male and female separate plants, so you need separate. Those again aren't trees, so I had also planted this Dracaena studinary with it, which has been nibbled a lot, but is still alive, so that is something to be said. They've had a weird year. Some of them are doing very well, some of them are doing very poorly, and there doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason to it. And something that has mostly done very well this year, so this is Annona squamosa, I think, I believe. Again, the Annonas I've got mixed up on this year, but this is coming along nicely. It's not trying to flower as far as I can see under this burnt but alive Dracaena fragrance, but it is coming up. It had lost a lot of its leaves because it did get quite dry. It is trying to flower just in there. So that's good. I'm pleased with that. And then just over here, further into this thicket of, well, mostly we've got sickle bush, quite big sickle bushes, and a lot of guavas, and more of this ipe everywhere. And up that end you can see the tops of the avocado trees, which were dying back quite significantly, but once these acacias, so this is a Senegalia, so a straight thorn, no sorry, so this is a Vachellia, which is a straight thorned acacia. Once that came in, these avocados went straight back into growth mode rather than dieback mode. So they are quite good at socializing. It's been most of my life since they've fruited, so we'll see if they start too soon. If not, pruning avocados that are sulking is usually quite a good way to stimulate that. But anyway, So then we have in here this little Palestinian sweet lime or Indian lime. So this is sometimes treated as a subcategory of true lemons because it is the same cross of a Mandarin pomelo cross and a citron, and it is doing really nicely in what is currently pretty dense shade, but everything here apart from the guava is deciduous and will be reliably deciduous. The guava they will be pruning quite heavily, and eventually it will come out entirely, as will a lot of these ipes once they start to form a problem. But for now, again, they're quite a good biomass accumulator. And they are very deciduous. So unless this is showing shade stress, I will leave them in. I have found these do very well in pretty deep shade, so I'm not that worried about it. And a tree that I actually planted because it does get, if we look straight up, some direct sunlight. So this is Syzygium cumini, I think. So this is the Java plum. So this is quite a large Syzygium. It has a fairly tasty fruit. As far as, I mean, Syzygium does have a huge range of fruits, but some of them can be a little bit astringent. This one I've found, when I've eaten it, less astringent. It's a very good one for making jams as well. This did get quite burnt. You can see when the first rains came, they were a little bit light and not followed by very bright sun. And that did burn a few leaves on a few things, but all this fresher growth is since then all the way down. We've got this as well. So I'm pleased with how this is coming along, even if its Dracaena was a little too small and didn't last the dry season and it's just mush now. There might be something below ground, but I doubt it with that. So from our Syzygium we're heading a little bit further into the shade to probably the most sheltered spot I've dared plant. There is a more sheltered spot, which you can just see over there, which is where we have a hive because some bees had moved into a barrel. And this is not one to harvest from. You can't actually open it up, but this is the African honeybee. They are a little bit highly strung. They moved into a barrel, so it was not a usable barrel, so my father turned it into a beehive and hung it into a tree, and they moved back into it pretty quickly when that happened. And yeah, they get a little bit tetchy sometimes when I'm a bit close, so I'm trying to not go too close to them planting and pruning wise, except very late in the evenings, but we will be going reasonably close to them, closest planting next up. Yeah, we also have to not step on the thorns, because sicklebush isn't called sickle because of anything about its flowers. It's because sometimes these thorns, which all the ones I'm seeing here are actually really very straight, but they can be very long and hooked. Here we go, here's a typical one. So if it doesn't decide to develop into a branch, which every thorn on these can, it turns into these massive hooked thorns, which, because they're very woody, do not tend to rot, unlike this one which has fallen through it, which is the straight thorned. Where is it? Lost it. Unlike these ones which have fallen through it, which are the straight thorned acacias, which are much less woody, much longer thorns, but they tend to rot faster, so stepping on them doesn't end up being for so long. But yeah, so try not to step on them or get chased by bees, so fun. But yeah, we've got a lot more ipe around here, and we've got this seasonally very dense canopy from this straight thorned acacia, the Vigelia, up here. And then, yeah, down in here we have a lovely little jackfruit. So this is Artocarpus heterophyllus, and you can see in this noise sheltered environment, despite it really wanting a wetter environment than we naturally provide here, it is doing quite nicely. So that is coming up well, I'm pleased with that. And just over here we did have a pandanus to keep it company, and there is still some life in the roots there, I think. No, that's gone. But we also have this little Annona reticulata. I think reticulata again is getting confusing, but that is doing nicely, as is its Dracaena. It only went in at the beginning of the rains, so the Dracaena, it is ideal time for planting this wild type of the Dracaena fragrans. There's no real ideal time unless it's really wet to plant the corn plant one, but you'll see a couple of those have survived the abuse. But yeah, I'm pleased with these. And heading further from the thorns, and still through lots of ipe, we have another of those which was going in to replace a Litchi which had got sunburned. So this one did, like the Litchi, get a little bit sunburned because when I put it in, this sickle bush here didn't have leaves. So there might be a few rounds of sunburn here, but it has sprung back up nicely, and they do seem to be significantly more resistant than Litchis generally. even without watering. I've found ones that I planted in sheltered locations cope with the deciduousness of a lot of our native trees. And it will not always be at the mercy of deciduous trees, hopefully, because this is another Annona. This is Annona muricata. You can see it's 3 meters from the last one we looked at, so it will share some headspace. I've mentioned a few times that Annonas are a little bit out on their own. We don't have many things that eat them wholesale. We have a few butterflies, but they're not particularly prolific. So that shouldn't be a problem having them quite close together. And yes, this is the soursop Annona muricata with much more sort of waxy leaf. And again, nice growth coming up. I'm really not expecting flowering on that until it's at least 5 years old. And over here, we finally have a lychee that not only didn't need replacing, but has a new leaf on it. We have another one in this field which got new leaves when the rains arrived, and then seems to have died at least above ground. So we'll see if that springs back up again. But this not only has some of its original leaves, but it's got this lovely new leaf coming, and hopefully it will do some more growing before the end of the rain, so it's significantly more robust by the next dry season. And down in here we have where we had got another lychee. This is the one that had grown. It had been burned by some unfortunate weather, then it had grown some lovely leaves along here, and then it got burned again. So hopefully it'll come back up. It's still pretty firm in there, even though the ground is very wet, so that's pretty promising about the roots. But so far, nothing visible. We have replaced it, well, sort of replaced or accompanied it in case with this lovely little Portulacaria. So this is the speck boom. This is actually edible. I find it a little bit astringent again. That's just, you take the tender leaves and pinch them into salads. Quite high sugar, but quite nutritious. Very high vitamin C. But yeah, decent little plant, and that's coming up all right. And over here we have Lazarus, who is a fairly resilient. I know you're joking. You might not be joking. No, you are joking. So this is a fairly resilient phoenix. It is not on the list currently because you can see no visible above ground life, but I did dig it up a while ago to just have a look. And then for the 3rd time, there is new life down there, so there is a little bulb coming up, and hopefully with the rains around that will now survive. This is one of the palms that can suck, and not all of them can. Most of them can't, but this one can. But we have put in to replace it a Euphorbia tyricale, which if Lazarus does decide to spring back up, this little pencil tree can be cut off at ground level and moved somewhere else and keep being cut off at ground level, and what stays low will basically be a little toxic barrier to keep him protected. And next up we have Eugenia uniflora. So this is the Suriname cherry. As is usual, they don't tend to go up to begin with, they tend to go out when they first start settling in. Usually they root for a year, then they go out, and then they go up. But then, yeah, this one has considerably expanded. I think it had 3 leaves before the rains hit, none of which are currently left on it, I don't think. But it's nice and bushy, nice and healthy, tiny, which you can see against my hand, but significantly better than it was. So this went on one of my little cousin's birthdays because he is cherry obsessed. Probably not this cherry though. It was one of 2 cherries that I put on his birthday, both Suriname cherry, but unfortunately the other one did turn to toast. So I put in another small tree that does well. So this is another Annona squamosa, I think. So this is rough-skinned custard apple, the most hardy of the custard apples in my opinion so far. And there's loads of custard apple types that I haven't got my hands on yet, but this one's pretty resilient. As you can see, this is a tree that's like 60 centimeters tall, maybe, and it's got flowers coming already. Oh, well, knocked that one off. It doesn't now. And under this bit of grass, so not far away from those, so it will form a bit of canopy to the south of those one day, we have a Dracaena studinary, which doesn't look poorly, which is great. I do think it actually started buttressing. Now that might have been one of the others. But yeah, this is nice and firm, nice and healthy. This was in it as a tree in its own right, which mostly the Dracaenas haven't been. So yeah, I'm pleased to see that it has actually stood up for itself. And just over here, there was another Dracaena in as a tree in its own right, another Dracaena studinary, which, well, you can see not so much with the farm. There's no life at that end. It is still pretty solid in the ground, and there is possibility there's still some life at the base of the stem, but I have replaced it with a white mulberry. Now, Morus albus, which is the typical mulberry, is technically a white mulberry anyway, but this is a cultivar of that, where the fruit remains white and should be higher pectin, and so should be very good for jam. It's also got a much bigger leaf, considering how much water it's been having. Usually you'd be much later in the rains to have this size leaf from the standard wild type of the white mulberry. And here, next to our little Barbary fig that went in for Mike's birthday. Barbary fig is a bit of a joke because it's not from the Barbary Mountains, and it is not a fig, it is a prickly pear from Mexico. But anyway, here is the focal tree for this whole area. So this is Saber pentandra, I hope, which is the kapok, which has these I just cannot get over this. There's a few trees that have this, and I just think they are all spectacular, and it is wicked. Truly wicked. And it has had some ups and downs. It did go leafless for a while. You can see that is not the case currently. It is starting to grow, so we've got about 5 inches of growth so far this year along that branch. A little bit more on some of the outward branches, I think. It did get ring barked, which is never good. Not entirely ring barked, but something, probably the pouch rats, had to chew at the bark here. You can see it sent out some roots above that, which is one of the great things about buttressing rooted trees, is that they can reroot over that, so you can't really ring bark things like a rubber tree to death very readily, because they'll just send out new roots past it. And this has done that, so I'm really pleased with that. And then down here, which will form the eastern boundary of its sub-canopy, so we've got a compost heap there, which will probably need some sun, so we'll have to keep it pruned a bit there. And we have actually got power lines up there, so we'll have to stop the kapok from interfering with those. And so just here, this Masao, which will like a little bit more light. They do okay in shade compared to what people seem to expect of them. This is Ziziphus, so also called a jujube, but this is coming up nicely. It did die right back. You can see this is the original stem. There is no life on the bulk of that, but there's 4 or 5 lovely little stems popping back up from near the base, looking really good. They do tend to do this. They pretend to be dead, sometimes for years. They spring up pretty vigorously, but I'm very pleased to see it. Just on the other side of those power lines, I'm going to be doing a bit of zigzagging here because there's a whole little long section now. We've got another pencil tree. This actually went in not as a replacement, but it is coming up nicely. It's got a little companion which might eventually be a tree in its own right, which is a Senecio decarii, which is one of the Madagascan succulents, which is getting a little swamped by some of the giant grasses, but we'll just pull off some of the leaves of that, so give it a bit more space. And then just making sure I don't step on them, because some of them have become inconspicuous. We have another Annona squamosa, so yeah, you can see again flowers. I'm not going to touch these ones in case I knock them off again. This one has a dogtail cactus as a companion plant. I don't know whether this has an edible fruit, but it's in the same subfamily as the dragon fruit, and most of which, when they fruit, it is edible. So if I can get another clone from someone else's garden of this, then it should fruit when it flowers, and then we'll find out if it's palatable, because someone did tell me most of them are edible, but not all of them palatable, but he also said that some of them are very poisonous, so, you know, I'm not sure how safe I feel about that. And then just here, almost under the power lines, but a little bit offset, so it shouldn't interfere, and it's a small tree anyway, so it should be easy enough to keep it well below, and it responds very well to pruning. We have another Eugenia uniflora, so this is the Suriname cherry. This did get burned right back. There's a couple of its original leaves left, I think. Most of this is new growth since the rains arrived, and this is one of the cliff-dwelling calincos, so this is Tugelic cliff calico. It's really nice to see it doing pretty well in flat land despite our rain. Again, sand really helps with that, but Dracaena is toast, so I might need another marker here. but the aloe is doing okay, so I'm okay with that. And over here we have some sort of olea. So this was sold as African olive. I don't think this is Olea cuspidata, which is the thing that is usually called African olive. So Olea europea, subspecies cuspidata, I think, which is the same species as the edible office. Same species as the edible. Oh look! Oh, would you look at that? That gorgeous little beast. Do you see it? Just how tiny this little guy is. I did put up a short a little while ago about chameleons getting polka dots when they're stressed. Generally speaking, you won't see that with little tiny ones unless you really upset them. They're not very used to what isn't a threat, which I suspect contributes to their not having the best survival when they're at this size. But really nice to see wildlife using trees. I do say one of the things that really fills me with joy is when you see a bird nesting in a tree you've planted, but a baby chameleon roosting in it is even sweeter. Yeah, so this is one of the oleas, and we'll see which one, basically based on the growth rate. Eventually it will hopefully do something else, but some of them might be slow enough that by the time I die it will be a large shrub. But it's olea. May or may not be useful in the long term. We will find out. And over here, although the Portulacaria is more part of the original planting, I had planted a Dracena studinary, I think, originally. It died, and so we planted this little tiny Savanut instead. So this is another Pachira glabra, and it's doing fine. It's a little bit shriveled here. This was some early attempt at growing during the rains, and its meristem is not currently doing anything. You can see a little brown spot there where there should be a little green cone, but it's alive, and they tend to take a lot of abuse, but they can take a little while to settle into abusive locations. And over here we have somewhere where we'd lost, I think, a Suriname cherry had been the original planting. There was no sign of it. Its Dracena was also mush. So we planted another Dracena as a marker, and we gave it a nice little rough lemon. So this is Citrus ex Jambiri, which is my favorite lemon, as you might guess. And that is looking nice and healthy, and it's not got as much growth as the one in shade, but that's not to be unexpected. And it is healthy enough, so I'm pleased with that. We've also got, just over here, something a little closer to Kapok. We've got a Dracena studinary, which again is alive. I think this might be the one. Yeah, you've got these little warts forming on the bark here, and that is the start of little buttressing roots. Because unlike a lot of the Dracenas, these do buttress quite readily in the right situation, so hopefully, once everything's up and it's a bit dense here, this will look properly tropical. But one way or another, it's a nice plant, it's a good plant for biomass accumulation, and having buttressing roots just makes things look more tropical and exciting in my opinion. Something else to add a little bit of shade. We have here a Terminalia manteli. Again, it suffered a little bit, so its original upright point was here, but it's gained a new one just here. But it's covered in leaves. It was not covered in leaves during parts of the dry season. It was completely leafless at various times. It hasn't grown much, but it has produced leaves, and that is, for its first rains, that is a good start. You really want it to be showing growth by its second rains, but if it's at least got new leaves for its first, that is ideal. Better than no leaves. Yeah, it's Dracenas, all complete toast, I think. I don't know, these were a flexor and they don't do so well in sun. Yeah, there's no signs of life in any of those above ground. Might be something below ground. They can eventually come back above ground, but it doesn't look like it currently. And over here I had planted a champaka. You can see this is kind of on the edge of the acacias from the other side, and I thought it was far enough away from the power lines that we would be okay with a biggish tree and just a little bit of pruning. Unfortunately, then we went away, and it did not thrive. It did stay alive while I was away, but when I came back and started watering it, it didn't pick up again, and eventually the termites just finished it off. So we replaced it with a Dracena studinary, which, despite having shown this stress during the dry season, since it's gone in. No, not since it's gone in, since the rain started while it was in a bag, actually, I think. Anyway, it's firmed up really nicely. There's a good solid bit of stem here. There's some new leaves coming out the top. So yeah, so hopefully this will do better. And down in here, somewhere, quite a way back, we have, yep, Euphorbia bicompacta. Currently it is leafless, but you can see this nice green stem. It can photosynthesize through its stem like a lot of the succulent euphorbias. It should eventually produce some nice big purple leaves. It should be happy in sun and shade, but this year a few of them in sun have sucked a bit. I don't think any of them died. One of them I thought had. Dug it up and found it was still pretty lively below ground, just biding its time, as some things do. But it's alive, so that's alright. Next along, and something that prunes very well, so it's okay, reasonably close to the power lines. It's not as close as it looks, because that's kind of a forced perspective. Here we go. That's more accurate, I guess. Maybe still a little bit forced perspective. But yeah, so this is Plumeria rubra, I think. White flowered variant thereof, if it is Plumeria rubra. But it is a little bit soft. Possibly a little too... No, the main trunk is pretty good and solid, so that's good. It's just this branch here might be getting amputated. But this went in to replace an Erythrina cristagalli, which is one of the South American erythrinas or coral trees. This will need a little more pruning to keep it a reasonable size for here. It's also going to be a little bit less good for the soil. Erythrinas are great for the soil. These are bad for the soil, but they are better for the water content of the soil, provided they're not planted too densely. In low densities, they're helpful, but in high densities, they're lethal. And back into a bit I haven't scythed, we have got Mangifera indica. Now you might think on a property with I think 200 and something mango trees already in the ground, I don't need mangoes. But actually I lost two of the mangoes I think that I planted this year. So the olive relative is actually on a mango spot as well, but this is should be the large green kidney type mango, based on the seed it came from. They usually breed reasonably true, although not always. But it is nice and vigorous and green. This is, I think, the oldest of the pre-rains leaves, so all of this above there is new. So that's good. And over here, despite some problems, it did get trampled and it did get quite burned at one point, I think. So you can see a little bit of burning at the base, but it's turning upwards. We've got a nice little Yucca gigantea. Should be a good little addition. This doesn't have to worry about the power lines, it's beyond where they get to. So this is coming up alright, and I'm happy about that. No sign of its aloe, which was not small. Next up, we have another Yucca gigantea. Originally there was Dracaena studinary here. It died, so I planted a Yucca gigantea, and I planted with it a piece of Ursulinus cereus, possibly Hylas cereus, depending how you classify them, so one of the dragon fruits. I'm not sure it's undulatus, but it is a very variable one, and someone who grows them professionally said it is. But it's a cutting from a friend's garden. They've never had a flower or fruit. Hopefully if it is undulatus, it'll improve the fruit set on ours, because different clones usually does that. Its shape is very different, and the mature stems are much more robust than I'm used to. This is much more typical of what I expect, but this was all grown when it was very dry and in way too much shade. But yeah, hopefully it will perk up, and the yucca seems to be doing okay. And just here, we have a little sore point. This is still firmly rooted. So this is a Spathodia campanulata, I think. So this is the Nandi Flame, which I planted for one of my uncles who passed away, I think on his birthday. Unfortunately, it is currently doing nothing. They are very tough. They can spend a long time doing nothing, then spring back, and I'm hoping that is what's happening here. There might be a little green growth point down in there, but I'm not going to reach into all these prickly aloes to find out. But in case it doesn't come back, I've planted another speck boom, which I do think is another lovely tree. It's another one that's really good flower, although rather than being a big visual spectacle, this is one of the best ones you can plant for honeybees. And seeing as that hive I showed you earlier is over there, and we do have some harvestable hives around, more of these is good. Over here we have a lovely little Sirius. So I think this might be the Jamacaro. I do not know for certain. I should try and work it out better, but a lot of the cactuses are quite difficult for me to understand the distinctions between. But anyway, most of the Sirius that are grown outside of their native range do produce a fairly palatable fruit. I'm hoping this is either Jamacaro or very weird to me looking Rapandus, both of which I know produce an edible fruit. But I'm not sure that the spine count is accurate, but we'll see when this is a little bit more mature how it looks. But yeah, this is a very small bit of growth, but a very visually appealing one, I think. Just this little bobble of new growth on this old stem. And then over here we have another Yucca gigantea. We've actually got 3 here. This is definitely the most vigorous, despite being the smallest when it went in. That one had sulked significantly, but has perked right up, which is strange. It sulked because it was right next to a little bit of shelter, more than the other 2 get. And that one also got a bit sunburnt, but has perked right back up. So there's 3 of them just in this little area. There is also, in the middle of them, something much more native. So although this looks like a cactus, this is another euphorbia. This is Euphorbia ingens, which is the candelabra tree. It's a fantastic native woodland to forest succulent. And yeah, it's mostly medicinal in its uses. There's nothing really edible about it at all, but it is visually stunning, and it's a really good toxic barrier to a lot of things. It's not ideal to have a lot of them near bees, but 1 or 2 shouldn't be too much of an issue, because if there's a lot of their nectar, it can make the honey quite unpalatable. But again, that is a hive we can't harvest from, so that's fine. There's something quite nice here, talking about things being toxic barriers. This is Carcibus. So this is a natural pyrethroid producing, so it's related to the African marigold. It's a very strong smelling native wildflower, not a conspicuous flower, fantastic smell, and very good natural insect repellent. Just here we have where I had originally planted a, what did I planted? I planted a Brachystegia taxifolia, which is the dwarf Brachystegia, which is a lovely native tree, but that got destroyed by mole rats in very short order. So I replaced it with this lovely little Pachira glabra, which is the Sabanat, which is very much not native, but again, very resilient, lovely new growth coming up here, a bit distorted by coming up through the calico, but better to have the shade and be a bit distorted than not have it and be dead. And here we have another plumeria. Oddly, the main stems, they do have some leaves coming now. They look a little bit devoid at the moment. This main stem flowered very vigorously, a little bit that broke off, and I shoved in next to it when I planted it. Leafed up beautifully, didn't flower at all. I hadn't originally counted it, but yeah, considering it has leaves coming now, having already flowered, it is back on the list. So it is going in as a tree, not just as a sort of companion to Archigalia that's over there. But we also have here what should still be, was the other day anyway, a Brachystegia taxifolia. Yes, we do have leaves. We have multiple leaves. This is exciting. So this is the dwarf Brachystegia. So this is one that, if you want it to be tree shaped, you really have to prune it up, because it will stay about a meter tall if nothing browses it and there's no shade. If it's in shade, it'll grow almost as big as some of the really big Brachystegias, so things like the Masasa. But if it's not, it will stay tiny. And it will thrive, and it will look like a bonsai tree in the wild. It's fantastic, it's beautiful. And I'm really glad one managed to transplant, because they're usually pretty fragile about that. And once I transplanted them, and then rats destroyed one, and then something ate the other one, it's really nice to have one having managed. On which note, here is where the other one was, and isn't, and so now there is another Pachira glabra. And just next to that, also enjoying the shade of this hookthorn acacia, so Senegalia, I think, we have a moringa. So this is Moringa olefolia. There are actually several other moringas, which I did not know about until recently. But this is lovely, and it's come up really nicely since it went in. It was coming up pretty well when it went in, I think it was there. But all this is new and so tender and so nice. I think the leaves are mostly just used for tea, but the pods can be used as a vegetable, which I had eaten and just thought it was overripe okra, so I do know that it's quite palatable, just a bit stringy. And over here we had Delanix regia, which when it died, you can guess what I replaced it with. That is another Savanut, and it's doing fine. And near that we have what is called wild pear, but disappointingly doesn't produce an edible fruit, but is very popular with caterpillars, including some really fascinating ones. There is something running around on here, but it's not a caterpillar, something interesting, but it's not showing its face. But this has a fantastic flower, so again, really good for pollinators, and it's not too closely related to anything I'm going to be planting for food, so it's a good sort of natural companion plant barrier in that sense. Just around the corner, so about 1.5 meters away, maybe a little more at the base, we have the Tahiti lime, and as these are wont to do, it is already trying to fruit. I don't know whether it'll hold these, we'll see. It's got quite a lot of light here, which I'm hoping, this does seem to be the most light-loving of the limes I've planted. I'm hoping this won't be a problem for it, but we will see. And then we're going to be heading just a short distance away to what looks like banana leaves. This is actually turmeric coming up. You can see it from a rather humble little root. It turns into something quite massive. But down in here we have another soursop. I might actually have to cut the turmeric back a little because that's a little undercoloured, I would think. But it feels healthy. It looks pretty vigorous, so I'm happy with how that's coming. And we're going to head around this big avocado tree. This actually used to fruit massive fruits at one point, but it has been not thrilled at how much the bamboo has pushed out, but also I just think the soil has been a little bit settled. Just having grass on it, it tends to compact a lot. I'm hoping having a few other things here will build the soil up, help keep the base a bit more humid, and we should get some decent fruit. It has been fruiting more abundantly the last couple of years, but still not the size it used to. But anyway, down here we have another Dracaena student. It seems like the ones I planted that already looked awful when they went in have done better, because this was a stump that had seemed to die, as you can see from that, and then had sprouted from the base. And said base, when I planted it, yeah, it looks pretty good. And then just heading along a little bit towards the workshop, and we're still back in the area where the Tahiti lime was, and this gorgeous thing here is a banana that really didn't need this Dracaena mesangiana as a marker, but it's standing up to it, so never mind. But yeah, the banana is looking good. That growth would probably have happened even though it left it on the ground at this point, because it was starting to push that out, but we'll see if it carries on at a decent rate and if the leaf forms well. Next over we have one of relatively few queen palms that have done okay this year. This is a Sagris romanzofiana that I dug up from where some pouch rats had one way or another seeded it near their burrow. And several other palms I did that too, did not survive. This one was in the worst state when I picked it up, but is in the best state now of those ones, so yeah, that's good. And it's prolifera, Calico prolifera has definitely proliferated itself, which is the idea here, because I want to add something other than bamboo leaves to this, because bamboo leaves, again, they can add to quite compacted soil. Its companion did not do so well, so there was another Sagris romanzofiana here. You can see they were sort of supposed to form a little bit of an archway. This one got replaced with a Yucca gigantea again, once it was completely toasted. And we've got a little piece of one of the self-fertile dragon fruits coming up there. And just a little way away from that, so maybe 2 meters. So the Yucca will need pruning. They will need pruning if you want them to get along with anything, because they can become very dense otherwise. We have a pomelo, so this is Citrus maxima. The maxima is because it produces the largest fruit of any citrus. They can be like 8 kilos. Sometimes they're fantastic fruits. I would love to have them growing. So far we do not have any mature ones, but I think it's only over this last year I've managed to get my hands on them, so yeah. So hopefully they should do well. They seem to be doing well. This one hasn't actually grown much this year. As far as I can think, only one of them has. But it's only recently in, so hopefully that will be coming. Over here we have a replacement. So the replaced tree is this little stump deep in here, which is still very firm in the ground, so there might still be some spring back, because it is a lychee, and that is something they do. There does seem to be some fungal activity down there, so that might be it being finished off. But we've replaced it with this little Annona squamosa, which I know is Annona squamosa because I've grown it from seed, so I know what the parent tree was. And then over here, I think we have possibly the only tree in this section I didn't replace. Which, yeah, there were a few when I went around on the last day of planting with replacement trees. There were a few I missed. I'm not convinced this is still alive. This is another phoenix. It is not on the list because you can see it is still holding on, which is a good sign with phoenix, but it is not showing signs of life. Everything else in this planting is doing well. These are crinums, so this is a natal lily. Fantastic flowers when they come up. Both of them come in. They can be a little bit thirsty, so I'm really pleased they survived. Disappointed this usually very hardy palm didn't, but we'll see. Not so far from that, you can see palm there, this here. We have one of our most sociable trees, so this is Philanthus emblica. So this is emblic, Indian gooseberry, or amla. I like to call it amla. I just like the sound of the name, I think. So this has a very light open canopy when it's mature. It is evergreen once mature. Usually here, the ones I've planted, that I think the oldest is 3 now, are fully deciduous because in the dry season they just give up on having leaves, which is more or less what our native Philanthus do, but then they spring back very readily. And you can see all of this up here is new stem since the rains arrived. It was just a stick before the rains hit, so really pleased with that. Over here there was a macadamia, but like several macadamias that I planted, something ate it. This time from above, usually it's from below, so you know that's different at least. And then I replaced it with a sabanut because of course I did. And then we have another sabanut here, which didn't go in to replace anything. It was when I realized this area was lacking one and I was running out of places to put trees. So I put a sabanut here, and that again is doing fine. It's Dracaena, with it being a relatively late one, and I'd sort of run out of big ones to use before I realized that I could use some of the ones in shaded areas because now the rains have arrived. I can. But its Dracaena, it seems to be toast again, but the sabanut itself is fine and should be significantly higher soon. It's coming up nicely. Just next to that little sabanut, where it was supposed to share canopy with a Litchi, we had a Litchi that was complete toast, I think. Oh no, there's still a stick of it, and it's still firmly in, so hopefully it might spring back. But in case it doesn't, there's a little Suriname cherry here, who is very little, but seems very resilient. And hopefully will fill out. If the Litchi does come back, they're quite sociable plants. They do seem to quite like being in at least close companionship with one other small tree. So yeah, hopefully they'll get on all right, at least for a while. And the cherry will fruit sooner, so if it does, then we can put the seed somewhere else and remove this or trim it down so it's just a sort of shrub around the base. But one way or another, yeah, that one thing is live here. And just over here, going back past the palm, we have a Mexican lime. So this is one of the forms of citrus pass. So this is the sort of original lime. So this is the original hybrid, I think, between a citron and a Citrus hystrix, which is the macrut and the micranth and a whole bunch of similar limes. But this is quite good at breeding true from seed. Not always, because at some point it crossed with a true lemon to produce the Tahiti lime, who is somewhere over there that we saw just now. But you can see this is again flowering. I have found the old one we have of these, much older than me, really likes shade, so I'm hoping having this, what is this? This is a big Ipe up above here, and this is the Senegalia here, both of which can be pruned, both of which tolerant to pruning, as is this self-seeded guava down here. I'm hoping that will really help this be quite stable here. And just in case that's not enough shelter for it, we have one of our nice small shrubby trees that does like shelter. So this is Annona squamosa, I think. This is one I didn't grow from seed, so I'm not 100%. But you can see it's come up nicely. This did get nearly leafless during the dry season. There's a few little leaves here that had come back up in the warm part at the end of the dry season. But most of this is since the rains arrived, and there is again flowering down there. It shouldn't be able to hold fruit at this size, so it isn't too much of an issue if I knock that off. But the companion plants are mostly doing fine here. It's just not the Dracaena fragrans. There is some life in the base of the stem, so there might be a revival here, but not currently. Finally, there was a revival here. So this was the first Kigelia africana that I planted this year. It went in on the same day as our plumeria friend there. And this has spent most of the year looking like a stick. It got eaten really badly by woolly bears when it first went in, and then it tried putting out some side shoots, and then those got eaten by woolly bears, and then it just sulked. But now we've got not only this nice leaves, and these are starting to harden, so hopefully they will soon be woolly bear proof, because they are a generous caterpillar. They're not good at eating mature leaves, just the young tender leaves. But hopefully soon this will be out of the woods before the woolly bears arrive for another round, but we'll see. And that should be all the trees in section 3, I think. I'm fairly sure. If I have missed any, I will do as I did with the previous one and nip out and film them individually once I notice. I am going through all the old plantings and seeing all the trees I planted, and there have been a couple that's like, oh, I planted that. So there's a few that I may have entirely forgotten existed. But so far, no great surprises, and for the next one we will be going on the other side of that bamboo behind me for section 3, which is a significantly different soil and significantly different sort of environment, and also a significantly different aim. Mostly, there's one bit which is kind of similar, but mostly it's going to be quite different in terms of what we are looking at, how I've planted it, how I'm expecting it to develop, sort of environment I want to create, and yeah, the general care going forward. But yeah, that will be another day.